There is a housing crisis. We need more homes. Absolutely, no question. No one is doubting any of that. But you can't just bulldoze your way through to an outcome. You need to make people part, because we're not just talking about buildings. We're talking about homes. We're talking about people's memories and their communities and their connections, and that's more than a built form.
Welcome everybody to the Impact Policy Podcast. Today's episode, I'm joined by Adam Thompson. Adam Thompson is the Director of Partnerships and Engagement at Homes New South Wales. He's also the first person who's got a recurring spot appearing on the Impact Policy Podcast for the second time. Adam Thompson's a legend. He does a stack of amazing stuff across the community in terms of community development with young people. But this episode specifically, we take a deep dive in terms of his leadership work when we think about community engagement in the social housing and policy sector. So there's a stack of advice in there for practitioners, whether you work in housing policy or whether you work in engagement more broadly with communities. There's a stack of practical tools and advice in there that can help you on your journey. And if you're a senior leader or if you're working in systems reform and transformation, there's a stack of insight, learning and advice and guidance in here as well that we both bounce off each other and share. If this is your first time to the Impact Policy Podcast, please take a moment to follow, subscribe and support the work that we do. It's a completely free resource that we produce and that we put out there for the sector. And we're really passionate about championing this as a resource and a tool to be able to add as much value as we can for our listeners in our community as well. Thanks so much, and let's get into the episode. If people want to know, stack about, who you are, where you're from, you've got a hell of a backstory, let everyone know to check out episode 2, because we go deep into, who you are, where you're from and where you got to where you're at. So I thought maybe this yarn we can do a bit of a deep dive into, for people that don't know, maybe just a bit of introduction from a professional lens in terms of who you are, what you're leading and what your sort of priority and focus areas are, and we can bounce around that sort of space a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, last time I was here, I was here in my capacity as a boxing coach and youth mentor around the Woolloomooloo space, and right. I still proudly do that. But as these things intertwine, mate, things find a way into your professional life. And these days, I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Engagement at Homes New South Wales. Homes New South Wales is the New South Wales government agency that leads the government's response to social housing, affordable housing and homelessness. So really important work, and I'm particularly passionate about it. I'm a kid who grew up in social housing, another 2037 boy like yourself.
Absolutely.
Proudly a social housing kid. I get to work in a space particularly around elevating the voices of people who live in social housing. That is an area of the business I'm now responsible for, which I'm just really, really grateful for, because it gives you an opportunity. I think as a leader, I think you pine for an opportunity to influence a good outcome. And as it's happened, I've landed myself in a spot where I can really elevate the voices through the reforms that we've undertaken to influence the work we do and make people feel heard. Yeah. I think innately we all want a voice. We all want someone to listen to us and to not just be in front of us with their, looking us in the eye, but actually take those things that we've said away and make them mean something.
Absolutely.
And having lived in those communities and grown up in them and still have family and friends and those who require the support of social housing, I know that they often don't feel like they're being heard. They often don't feel like they can influence their lives or the lives of their kids. And I feel very fortunate that I can play a small role in maybe shifting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you've got that lived experience and that connection to what that sort of stuff means on the ground, it always sort of resonates a lot more strongly in practice, right? When you're trying to build something and you're talking about systems reform and systems change as well. When you think about that lived experience, you talk to, you still got friends, you still got networks that are very much living in communities in social housing, and sort of leaning into that conversation about lived experience. I'd love to, that's something that we really try and champion, lived experience at Impact, and that, and would love to hear, I guess, some of your thoughts around, your time at homes and your engagement with communities and tenants with lived experience, what sort of shifts have you seen since we first connected over the last couple of years in terms of how that's starting to shape housing policy?
Well, I think from an engagement standpoint, and this not limited to housing, this is a government thing, there's an element, and sometimes there's a statutory element where you have to engage in order to get things done, particularly through things like the planning system and whatnot. And I think the major shift has been doing what we need to do in order to get things done in terms of capturing voice or lived experience, to now actually looking at it and going, well, this actually can add value to whatever we're trying to deliver. Actually capturing it and going, oh, okay, well, that's not something we thought of, or why couldn't we implement that? I must admit, when I first moved into this space, that there was an element of, it was almost like a defensive mindset around, okay, well, let us talk to people so that will mitigate the tough conversations we'll have later. Let's do it up front. Like that was the thinking. And certainly how I've my thoughts and views on it has evolved over time has been very much around, oh, there's these beautiful little pearls in there. We wouldn't have found out if we didn't have these conversations.
Absolutely.
And the cross benefit of how empowered, like going into community and having people say something and then coming back to them and say, oh, based on what you told us, we're proposing this. Those personal experiences of seeing how that impacts someone, like seeing them go, I have a bit of pride.
Absolutely.
And I like it. We got mates who are tradies and stuff like that. When they go past the home that they built and they go, oh, mate, I helped build that joint. There's a synchronicity about like around that with people who shared something about their lived experience. And then they see it reflected in the work that we deliver. Whether that's a service improvement or whether that's a way that we've built a house and we say, hey, you told us about this thing and you said that like sometimes you don't feel safe coming in and walking into your home at night. So what we've done is we've put a range of lighting along the pathway and we've put some cameras here just to make sure that you feel secure. I've just seen the way that people take that in, and that just kind of builds on that passion to explore that, expand on it. And I'm really proud that our leadership and at Homes has really embraced that, and I get to play that, I guess, a small role in terms of that work and capturing it, which is really important.
I love that. I love you talk about the pearls of lived experience, and we use the reference. We talk about lived experience in the context of thinking about co-design, and we use this the river as a metaphor and a system to understand it as a framework. But we use the pebbles along the river representing lived experience, and all those pebbles, any pebble, they're all different. Some are bigger, some are smaller, some are a bit rough around the edges, some are very smooth. And we talk about lived experience in the sense of like sometimes the smaller pebbles, sometimes the bigger pebbles and the louder, the easier to you step on more of those bigger pebbles, but sometimes if you dig a bit deeper, you pull out some of the more smaller or maybe more rougher around the edges sort of pebbles as well. That's the diversity of lived experience and the diversity of our voices in our communities. And when we think about that with lived experience and design, thinking about going a bit deeper in terms of consultation and engagement and lived experience voices, and just sort of leaning into that and thinking about the work that you're doing in community and with lived experience. How does that sort of inform your approach when working with community, with the type of voices that you want to be hearing from, how you're trying to hear from, different communities, whether it's Aboriginal communities, whether it's, communities from wherever across New South Wales? Is there a sort of, learning that you've had over the last couple of years in terms of how you approach that sort of space?
I think one of the key things is be really upfront about what the engagement is for. There's a couple of things there. Like sometimes we're cracking on with something, right? Because we've made a determination that
absolutely
it's really important that we just get on with something.
Totally.
So if that is the case, don't call it engagement.
Absolutely.
Call it briefing. Call it a consultation. But don't call it something that it's not.
Totally.
Because sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it is, we're in a housing crisis. We've got 3 cottages. we've got an opportunity under our self-approval powers to turn 3 houses into 14 homes.
Yep.
Guess what? We think it's the right call.
Yep.
We're going to get on with it.
Yep.
So let's not pretend that it's not
Absolutely.
that. In other instances, though, where we've got something that's a longer form piece of work, like an estate renewal, for instance, there's an opportunity to shape 30 years of work.
Totally.
So okay, well let's explore that. Let's play a role in that. I think the other thing too is it's interesting. There's the IOP2 kind of guidelines around consultation and engagement and whatnot, and they're really good, and they you can apply them where all my team make sure they're qualified in IOP2 principles and all of that, which is really important. But my biggest lesson in terms of like capturing voices of community is the basic principle, which will resonate, I'm sure, with the people who watch this, is yarn at the front, business at the back. And create a connection with the people you want to talk with and have meaningful conversations outside of an outcome. It doesn't mean that some interactions are solely for the purposes of an outcome.
Absolutely.
But where the magic happens is where you've actually got a genuine connection.
Absolutely.
And then through that genuine connection, a trust is established. And through that trust that's established is this incredible conversation and dialogue that doesn't need to end when a project ends or something.
Definitely.
It can maintain and stay on course.
Definitely.
And, someone told me that was when I first started in this work, that's an Aboriginal community engagement principle. I'm like, well, why isn't that just a everyone engagement principle? Because it makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely.
Connect with someone, and once you've connected with them and created a relationship, well, then you can have a meaningful conversation. I don't know how many meaningful conversations you're having with strangers. I don't know. I'm not having a heap of them. But totally. With people I connect with, I share things about myself. I share things about my lived experience and my background. I'm not doing that with strangers, right? So that idea, and that's really been one of the driving forces behind one of the kind of key reform pieces for us at Homes New South Wales over the last year has been around tenant participation. And what does that mean? How do we define it? And if we're going to do it right, what does that look like? And what's it going to take for us to do that right? And but at its core, I bring it back to whenever I speak about the work is yarn at the front, business at the back. Our tenant participation teams we're framing them as frontline workers. Well, there's no work from home days. You're in community. You're connecting with tenants across the state. We've got 125,000 properties across New South Wales. I mean, the second biggest landholder from a government perspective in New South Wales. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of talents. That's a lot of opportunity to capture lived experience to inform the work we do. And it really comes back to that core principle of, okay, well, if we're going to do the reason we're doing it, so we can start yarning at the front, with the view that at the point in time that we may talk about business. Now, business doesn't mean about just building stuff.
Totally.
Business could mean how can we be better at the way we deliver our support and services to you. Instead of making an assumptions based on knee-jerk case studies or, this is embedded into the work we do, how we capture it and how we send it up.
I love that you've talked about the relational way of engagement versus transactional engagement, because the benefits there are long-term for practitioners and for the agency as well. When you go back into those communities, you'll continue to build on that because of how you've approached that from a relational perspective. Secondary, I love how someone said that that's an Aboriginal engagement principle, and that really reaffirms for me that a lot of principles around best practice in our communities are applicable across how we think about policy more broadly, and I think the more we can start to centre some of that in terms of how we think about policy more broadly, as opposed to our communities outside of the mainstream, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that was a really nice natural way that someone commented on that in practice. And then the second bit is around the how you talked about the reality about sometimes the conditions don't exist for in terms of participation, in terms of co-design or really like sometimes the decision has been made and something is going to happen, and so the spectrum of participation in terms of community voice is very specific because the conditions don't exist. This is happening, and this is the opportunity to have a voice in terms of whatever circumstances exist. But there might not be power in decision making here because of the example or the conditions here. And that was really great because really great. It was a really good example because it really leans into how people talk about engagement with our communities in terms of a blanket sort of lens. And we use this frame for, we call it the spectrum of participation. And it talks about, anywhere from sort of, I think, the lower end of the spectrum is about, informing community or providing some education for community, comms. Then it sort of creeps up to consultation, sort of engagement, co-design, co-participation, this sort of broad spectrum of community participation. And that's where we sort of see some of the frictions, right, is because almost, I think one of the challenges in the public sector is people are starting to use the language co-design a lot when it isn't. But I think the friction with that is because consultation is getting a bit of a dirty word, and people are almost too afraid to say that they've consulted on something because they don't want, because it's got it's been tarred with a bit of a brush, But the reality is actually, like, sometimes the conditions exist where it can only be consultation, and consultation, when done really well and it is accessible and community can participate, is really, really valid. And maybe there's a different layer with communities being over consultated or agencies not collaborating and stuff getting missed. Maybe that's part of it, but like, consultation is critical. But if we replace consultation by labelling everything co-design, we're missing a big part of the pie as well.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing is that we often talk about, people get stuck on the method of getting to an outcome. Sometimes getting to the outcome doesn't require certain things. Sometimes it does. But let's not get stuck always on the methodology of getting there. In a housing context, we hear a lot about things like tenant voting for renewal in places like East London, which is often gets compared to what we have in Sydney in terms of the construct. But it is a slightly different system, and it's very much managed and governed by kind of councils. That's why it's referred to as council housing in England. But they've got a system and a construct in place that allows for this idea of tenant voting. Now, people are quite passionate about tenant voting, right? Which is cool, and I can understand why. But for me, that's a method to getting to an outcome. And an outcome is delivering a project where the community feels like they have absolutely played a role in terms of landing wherever it lands. Tenant voting isn't the only way to achieve that.
Absolutely.
We can get stuck on the methodology, and I think, to your point around that, everything getting labelled co-design, which is a bugbear of mine too, it is, okay, well, these are all pathways in which for us to get to. So let's be honest about what we need to get to that. We've done a heap of work in the Bellambi community in Wollongong, and we are exploring it as an opportunity for estate renewal down there. A lot of our properties are run down and they're not fit for purpose anymore. They were built at a point in time where the homes that were built there were appropriate for the people who needed them. Those things have changed.
Absolutely.
The fastest growing group of people at risk of homelessness are women over the age of 55. They need a place where they can age in place, for instance. So them having a 3-bedroom cottage which they have to maintain and care for the gutters and the gardens, that's not conducive for someone aging in place, right? So they just as an example, right?
Absolutely.
So we need to make changes there. But one of the things is we can base that on the data I've just provided you, or we can actually go into community and have them own that in terms of what changes they think that we need in that community.
Yeah.
Because my view on it is the cookie cutter approach. Like, it's good to have guardrails because they give you some guidance, whether they're principles or whatever they might be. It's good to have those as a guiding, as a bit of guidance. But every community will need to be engaged with in their own particular way.
Definitely.
Like, you know, and you need to assess that before you just roll into a community and say, we're going to do a town hall and we're going to have yarn and we'll take that and we'll go, like,
absolutely.
That might not be what that needs.
Absolutely.
That community actually might need us to have smaller meetings with different cohorts in order to really capture, because some people might not feel safe in those environments.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in a place like Bellambi, one of the things was, well, let's just get in community, understand it. Let's invest some time in learning about it, learning about their challenges, create opportunities for them to share with us with no kind of locked in plan on this is how it's going to be done. Let's just go in and talk and get to know them. Let's yarn at the front before we get to the business at the back. And where we've landed is, you know, we were told, you go into community, no one wants any kind of renewal here. Leave us alone. We like our beachside suburb in Wollongong. We don't want anything to change. I mean, this is what people were saying, right? We go into community and all of a sudden well over 70% are calling for renewal. And that's because they were trusting us to have a conversation with us because we invested up front, because we took our time to embed in community and get to know people, get to know the people that mattered to the people, you know, and have those relationships. That now we do have a view. Now we are driving a people and place plan that's, I speak about it being co-authored by the people who live there, because it's all them telling us stuff, and we've we've created a document that captures all those things, but the information is from community.
Well, I mean, look, that's the whether you would go down a co-design path or not, that's the foundation of co-design, right? People assume that, and that's, you know, public sector makes the problem all the
place land.
But
yes,
public sector makes the slip up all the time of deciding something is co-design before doing any of that sort of stuff that you're talking about. So before you even begin that co-design journey, you've got this co-planning and co-discovery piece before you assess the conditions, if they exist, for you to be able to co-design together. So exactly what you talk about with that journey with Bellambi, that's about co-discovering, co-planning and understanding, and then getting to where you've got to as a result of that. Like they're the foundational principles where we see in the public sector when, you know, agencies, you know, and leaders like yourself make that decision at the forefront to work like that. That's what sets stuff up for success. Where we see stuff fall over is when, you know, well-intentioned leaders and agencies say, we're going to co-design it, and they make a decision about it. They haven't spoke to anyone. They haven't spoke to community and the best intentions to get the best outcomes. But then, you know, Impact or whoever comes in to support them with that, and then we go out to community and it's like, oh, hang on a second. That's not what community wants.
Where's the work that goes in before that?
There's this critical piece that is exactly what you're talking about.
And even with Bellambi and the work that we've undertaken there, the step before that, we did a step before that, which is we did a lived experience survey. And then there's a step before that. So in a place like Coffs Harbour, where we were criticised for not doing enough community consultation and engagement in the right way, well, I said, well, they haven't just said we haven't done enough, they haven't said we haven't done a good job at it. So let's work with all the community organisations to establish principles of engagement for the Coffs Harbour community. And so we partnered with all different orgs, you know, the local land council, the local community housing providers that are based up there, bodies like Peaks, like Shelter New South Wales and others who are operating in that region of Coffs Harbour. And the concept was, well, let's strip this thing right back. Let's actually find out how they want to be engaged with. Because they may have a different view on what our assumptions are on how they want to be engaged with.
100%.
So based on that, we basically got to a place and we put a lot of work into it of forming our principles of engagement, which not only for us, but we all signed as partners and service providers in the community about, well, we're all going to agree to engage with community like this because this is the way they're telling us.
Absolutely.
And like it seems a bit ceremonial, but sometimes that's what the occasion calls for.
Totally.
To give confidence to the community of, they're listening to
Absolutely.
us, right? So
Absolutely.
we all sign this thing, and it's a piece of paper, and it's not a legal document, right?
Yep.
But it's a call to action to be better, to listen, and to engage in the way that the community are asking us to have a conversation with them, to a point where now we've done that, and based on that, we're doing a lived experience survey in the Coffs Harbour region to better understand what they want to see more of, less of, stop, start, etc. And then that'll form the basis of what our next engagement may be. That may possibly be more direct in the way that we made the Bellambi one more direct because we got a lot of responses from them, and they were telling us things that they'd like to see more of, and that advance that consultation and engagement. So you can strip it right back if you've got the time.
Yeah.
And you've got to be really fair income about it too.
Totally.
Around, and that's why I come back to that. Don't call it what it's not.
Yeah.
Like be really clear of what it is.
And it's a lesson for leaders listening. Like some people might hear that and go, "Oh, do we have the?" It's an investment at the front end. Do we want to invest our time there, or do we want to crack on and there's a range of circumstances or conditions that impact the decision that you're going to make. But investing that energy at the front end to build those principles of engagement, that is going to, in terms of it's going to pay dividends, in the long term.
For sure, because one of the huge criticisms when I first stepped into this space was you're not listening to us. You're not meeting us where we are. There was a lot of that kind of narrative that was around. And we've got to listen to that. You know what I mean? And the reality is I'm also, cards on the table, the public affairs guy.
Yeah.
So there's all the things that happen when you don't do those things up front that you end up dealing with in through the media or through ministerials or whatever, letters to the local member. Yeah. If you're not doing that's actually the offshoot of not doing some of that work up front. And that doesn't mean that every single time, to your point, like there's been a lot of work around over consultation in the regions, particularly around that every time it requires that. But probably comes back to that earlier point of being really upfront about what something is. You know what I mean? And not everyone is always going to be happy.
Yeah.
I think what we're doing at Waterloo is going to be really special. I'm really excited about the Waterloo South Estate renewal. It doesn't mean that everyone is stoked about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's okay. I don't think any major decision that any government has made at any point in time
absolutely
wins over everyone. That's just not what it is. But
totally.
But if you're doing it in a transparent way, you're being upfront, you're fronting up, you're copping it on the chin when people have criticism, you're actually taking it away and analysing and asking, okay, well, what do we do with this? Is there something we can do with it? If we can't, how are we responding to it? Yep. Actually thinking about that in turn, because for me, that's real engagement.
Absolutely.
It's actually doing something with what people say, not just turning up, copping a spray, licking your wounds and then getting back on with your day. Definitely. It's actually, what does it mean? What's the context? And that's real. Well, that's meaningful in my view. And even if you do, and sometimes I've had to do it myself, where you have to go back and communicate, I go, I hear what you're saying, but we're not going to do that based on these things. Yeah. They're still not going to be happy with me. That's okay.
How do you deal with that for people listening that might be leaders or they're working in engagement and they do have to front up and they've got to have a hard conversation, or they've got to say, look, we've heard you and we've taken on as much as we can, but we're going in this direction. How do you manage that personally? And do you have any advice for people listening?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I can only draw on my personal experience around that. I think, look, if you can have a connection with community, broader connection than just that transactional bit, that does help.
Absolutely.
So if you know you're going to have to potentially have those conversations at a point in time, particularly on a long-form project.
Invest in it.
Invest in it early, to your point. I think that's really, really important. You have to be okay with it yourself, which is a hard thing in government,
Totally.
But you have to make peace with the decision. And I think what makes that easier is you make yourself part of owning it, the decision. So say, in my context, I'm not the sole decision maker with a lot of the things at all, but a long way away from that. But have I contributed to a conversation that a decision's been made a part of? Yeah, I have. So even if the outcome is not something I've envisioned, I have to take some ownership of that decision. because that's my role as a public servant.
Totally.
So I think you have to go into those conversations with a bit of conviction, around it. You've worked in government. You've got a lot of colleagues in places like DCJ, which you'd be aware around apologies, right?
Yep.
And a lot of the work that goes into that. That work around leaders through the department going in and having those conversations, they don't work unless you actually have conviction about what you're apologising for.
Absolutely.
And people will see through that. And I think, we joke about an interaction we had in Waterloo when we first really ramped up a couple of years ago around our engagement around the renewal, and kind of made some tweaks about the way we were delivering it.
Yep.
And I kind of fronted up and I said, look, my name's Adam. I'm the person who's been given the responsibility to do this work over the next little period. I said a couple other things, but the main line that stood out, I said, look, I'm going to stuff this thing up.
Yeah.
But it won't be because I'm not trying. But I'm probably going to fail.
Yeah.
But I want you to tell me when I failed, and I'll come back and I'll try to fix it.
Yeah, mad.
And we laughed because it was at a City of Sydney, one of Clovermore's town hall things she does across different social housing kind of dominant areas around the city, and people started clapping, and everyone's going, well, what? I remember Clover talks like, no one's ever got that response from Land and Housing Corporation, but it resonated, and I think that's where the importance of lived experience comes through, and on a basic principle that there's a real good bullshit radar.
Yes.
In my experience.
Absolutely.
With social housing people.
Absolutely.
I've got a reasonably good one.
Yep.
And I think, and most people I met in social housing also have a reasonably good one. So don't try to dance around things. You're better off shooting it between the eyes and saying, here's the story, you know. And in my case, it was, I'm going to try some stuff, and some of it might not work. But I want to tell you that I'm trying for these reasons, and because we care about what you have to say. So I think conviction about what you're talking to them about in terms of the question you've raised around advice, I think conviction is really, really important, because it's hard to convince someone of something when you don't believe it yourself. It's
that authenticity and care piece, though, that I think really shines through, like when you say you got that response at that town hall. And like you said, our communities have a bullshit radar, and so I think it's a real, it's a real reflection for people listening if they're working in leadership or community engagement, and they're tackling stuff like that where the policy and the decisions that are being made are affecting people's lives. They have to really be authentic and care about the work that they're doing, because if they are delivering it and they don't really care, that's when it's going to be tough.
And they'll see through it, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Every time.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. Homes New South Wales, still pretty young in a lot of ways. Systems change is slow. What do you see as sort of some of the strategies to keep building that momentum? You've talked about some different ways of working and things like that. How do you see sort of things progressing moving forward?
Yeah, really good. Look, we recently released our 10-year strategy, New South Wales homelessness strategy, a few weeks back, which has been really welcomed by the sector. And it seems like a long bow, but where you've got a body like Homelessness New South Wales, who are a strong advocacy service, who really a peak, who really fight for good outcomes in their space, prepared to kind of stand next to the minister and the CEO and say, look, we're on board here. Because again, this is this ownership piece, right? We've landed in a place where we have with the homelessness strategy, just as an example, because of years of advocacy and of a fight,
Absolutely.
And where we've landed to is a place where that a peak like Homelessness New South Wales feels empowered enough that they can actually stand next to government and say, look, we're on board with this. This is a really good outcome for our sector and for the people that we support. So, I mean, that just shows you the kind of evolution through that kind of piece. And I really think the key to all kind of strategy or reform is that it is informed. You know, like it's
Definitely.
like, again, I see people, I see the intent is right. Now, people want to do the right things.
Definitely.
But the second you there's a red flag there is when you make assumptions, or you assume you know what is best for the people that you're providing support for. Totally. You know, and we can fall into that trap because we're motivated and you want to get things done, and things take too long, and so you kind of push through. And again, the intent is really, really good. Like, it's really great, but unless you bring people along on a journey, right? And I know people fear that word journey because that means time.
Definitely.
But you know, a place like Coffs Harbour, like there was the previous government had signalled a estate renewal in that part of the world. Government changed, they pulled that. Okay, we've been doing some spot kind of development around there, nothing of huge scale. Yeah. But the sentiment up in that part of the world has completely changed. And without us having to, you know, not to say we don't need more housing, we absolutely need more housing in the Mid-North Coast. There's no question about it. No one's questioning that. But the fact that we have done meaningful and are engaged in meaningful conversations with community about shaping what the future of their community is in terms of what we can influence, like, the sentiment has completely shifted there. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Like, people who, you know, were on four corners just a few years ago saying how we're such terrible landlords and et cetera, and now in some instances our almost spokespeople for the work we're doing on there, without us asking them to be spokespeople, but they've kind of transformed into they're still the voices of their community, but they're actually speaking in a positive light, which is changing like how we can interact and make a difference up there. So that's the importance of that meaningful engagement, and they're the kind of shifts that we're seeing. And it doesn't always mean you're going faster and harder. Like, there is a housing crisis. We need more homes, absolutely, no question. You know, totally. No one is doubting any of that. But if you're just going to, you can't just bulldoze your way through to an outcome. You know what I mean? You need to make people part, because we're not just talking about buildings. We're talking about homes. We're talking about people's memories and their communities and their connections, and that's more than a built form. Definitely. Well, that's not, you know, like I still drive past fondly the place I grew up in at Glebe Street in Glebe. Yeah. You know, my mum still lives in community, not in the same place we grew up with, but I drive past there, and there was some things you saw, and you know, you saw some things. You know, that's and experienced some stuff, and it wasn't all roses and butterflies. But I drive past there, and my memories go. I look at that fondly. Like that home has a string of memories in there. Totally. You know, some of them good, some of them whatever, but they've formed who I am today. Absolutely. And I'm extremely grateful for them. The connections I made, the bonds I made in that place, you know. And the reality is, if my mum didn't get into that place, like, we were maybe homeless. Yeah. So, like, it's a reality. That's like, so it's not just a building. Yeah. It's a home. Definitely. You know? And we've got to be real about that when we look at certainly the work we do. And I think that's one of the major shifts is, you know, it's in our name. It's Homes New South Wales. It isn't the Land and Housing Corporation. Absolutely. It's Homes New South Wales, because we provide homes to people.
I want to ask you a question, and I think, you know, and thanks for leaning into a lot of that sort of stuff. And I want to ask you a question, because you got a really, you know, you got a really strong background as a senior leader, but you have a really strong background in the community sector, in the justice sector, and, you know, public sector more broadly too. But coming into Homes New South Wales, you know, and thinking about how, for you know, a symptom of the public sector is how all our agencies generally work in silos, and collaboration isn't always natural. When we start to think about these different roles that, you know, justice, health, you know, community services, you know, all these different parts of the public sector, they all have a critical role when we think about homes. Has there been much experience in terms of that cross-sector collaboration, how to bring other people to the table to respond to this sort of stuff more broadly? Is that part of the future sort of thinking in terms of different sort of stuff? because we know that, a range of residents coming into social housing are, interacting with different parts of the public sector, whether through projects, personal services, whatever that might look like. Any thoughts or reflections in terms of that sort of space?
Yeah, I think it's certainly an area where there's a focus around that. I think we could collectively be better. A lot of different government agencies will have various interactions with the same families, and I'm sure people have read, who follow this podcast, have read the different case studies, particularly around Aboriginal people in communities. Even in a place like the Department of Communities and Justice, they're dealing with out-of-home care, foster care potentially, housing, homelessness services. Like there's an interconnectivity. Well, even though correctives is outside, but so there's all of these things that these interactions. Have we nailed it? I think we're some way off that. But there certainly is a sense of commitment around making that a simpler process. I worked with the New South Wales Police for a period of time, and one of the things around victims of sexual violence, for instance, is having to retell their story multiple times, and the trauma associated and the triggers that are associated with that, where they kind of looked at reforming, they did some reforms around that, so people didn't have to do that time and time again and relive something that's maybe the most traumatic thing that people have undertaken in their life. So are there ways, particularly with the shared client base that we have? I reckon there absolutely is, but there's certainly a commitment around that collaboration. I think about human services work more generally. I think one of the things we kind of have to identify to be better, not so much silo, but all be better at what we do, right? Is, okay, well, what are the things that we are responsible for? You never want someone to come to you and you say, well, that's not my job, go to them. I don't think that's a good customer service experience, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, right?
Absolutely.
But let's be very clear about where the remits are, around all, like what are we primarily responsible for? Because if let's just say in the context of Homes New South Wales, if we're spreading ourselves thin, trying to do things because we feel it's the right thing to do but are outside our remit, that's energy and resources we're not putting into the main thing, which is for us is actually delivering social housing and permanent housing solutions to people at risk of homelessness.
Definitely.
Our vision is to end homelessness, right? Well, if we're spreading ourselves too thin around different things and not actually engaging, another department whose actual expertise is that, well, let's not duplicate these things. Let's make sure it's coordinated. So I pick up what you're putting down. I think there's a real desire and drive to want to do that. Are we there yet? I couldn't say that with any confidence, but is there a real desire for us to get there? I think there is. Yeah. And it starts with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have much thoughts around what the future looks like when we start to think about the homelessness crisis in terms of, just the general sort of audience listening and thinking about social housing more broadly? Anything people can understand and think about in terms of how we can see something shifting?
Look, one of the big things that came out of the homelessness strategy was a housing first approach, which is, you can't solve homelessness without building more homes. And I think as a whole of government response, we're looking at more enabling functions that we can just get out of our own way in many instances and just get on with doing that, for us, that means, acquiring underutilised government land in some instances and turn that into housing. But again, we have a lot of our own land, particularly in places in some of the regions where we'll have like a, massive block of land and one home on it, housing one person, right, with 3 bedrooms in it.
Yeah.
Right? Because, the kids have left and partner might have passed away and whatever the circumstance might be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of under occupancy for us.
Massively. So one of the best things that we can do, I guess, in terms of is having a housing first response, so look, that's really front and centre for us. I think one of the other key things has been is we introduced a program called the Homelessness Innovation Fund, which I guess called on the sector, a sector who largely had been used to being told about a way to respond, like in an informed response,
to empowering them to say, well, all the knowledge sits with you.
Yeah.
You're on the front line. Well, why don't you come up with some innovative ideas? And this is not like us passing the buck by any stretch, but like we can't capture like sitting in central offices, be able to capture every corner of opportunity that might arise in terms of a response. I think it's been one of the great additions to our response to homelessness is some of the innovative ideas that are coming from small SHS providers who are saying, hey, we've got this idea. We reckon this would be really good if we could do this, but we just don't have the money to do it. They put forward a proposal and throughout the Homes Innovation Fund, we'll be able to fund some of those ideas. Now, are they all massive scale? Not in all cases, but do they give us an opportunity to do something without calling it a pilot and try something else and actually empower the sector to say, we've been sitting on this idea for 10 years, but haven't had the means of which to do it. We'd love to give it a crack. Here's our proposal. And we've got the mechanic now through this Homelessness Innovation Fund to do it. So there's some practical things around, but it does come back to you can't solve homelessness without housing. And for us, things like, speeding up planning processes and self-approval powers and being able to utilise different planning pathways. It seems like a bore, but that's what's going to enable and supercharge our ability to deliver, and that's how we can help homelessness, is building more homes.
You touched on that ageing in place stuff.
Huge.
And bro, that's massive. Like I have a cousin in South Sydney, lives in social housing, and on their cul-de-sac and block, there is 10 properties. They're the only family, and every other property is, they're all 3-bedroom, 2-story townhouses, and every other property is single resident, elderly resident, families grown. They've been there for generation. And their families grown up, moved out, and and you sit there and you think about, you hear about this waiting list for social housing and families that are homeless, and you go there and then you think like, how do you navigate some of those conversations and start thinking about aging in place and structures and strategies? Because the reality is, like you said, we talk about conditions and stuff, and it's like, well, the reality is we've got thousands of families that are homeless or experiencing homelessness on these waiting lists. We've also got these dwellings that are underoccupied. And how do we actually start to have conversations around what aging in place looks like? Because it's almost like we're dealing with a generational, we've had all these houses created and families have grown up in them.
Post-war was all about, it was about families and working families. Where now the priority list is very much, a big part of that priority list is housing people who are literally at the end of the line. Who've got really complex, whether it's disabilities or situations or escaping family and domestic violence, they do shift up to the top of that priority waiting list, as they should. But they don't always require that home, and that's the shifting face. The reality is look, if you're a young person who's moved into social housing, maybe you come out of home care, you're transitioning into a housing solution through social housing as you either tackle your studies or start your career or something like that, which is just a thing that happens, absolutely. Then you could be part of that housing continuum where you might be able to, based on your earning capacity, move into a private rental, let's say, or save for a mortgage or whatever it is you might want to do. But then we've got the other end, right? And I touched on it before about that fastest growing cohort is that women over the age of 55, right? Yeah. Once they come in, they're not leaving. And that's why we talk about age in place and making sure that we're building homes that are accessible, that people can stay, because the economic impacts of somebody able to stay in their home longer actually takes the pressure off the economy, because they're not entering the health system as early, or the aged care system as early as they might have to if they were in a home that wasn't adaptable in terms of being able to be a place where they could, you can install rails, or they didn't have a step entry or whatever it might be. So that's when we talk about age in place. Now, are the conversations difficult around relocations? Absolutely. They often are, right? Yeah. But here's what I'll say. So at Waterloo, at Waterloo South, where we're undertaking the largest ever renewal in the southern hemisphere, we've worked really hard for 2 years to make sure that people had the information and had opportunities to talk to us and ask whatever question they wanted. And we turned up. And some days we'd turn up and put a barbecue on, 2 people come, and sometimes we'd turn up and 30 people would come, and whatever it might be. But that consistency just kept turning up, right? And now normally when we run a relocations program, if I can call it that, at the type of scale that we're doing here, like it can be a really traumatic process, at scale, what happened with this recent one is we were able to have conversation. The feedback we were getting was, I understand. I knew this thing was coming. They understood the process. They understood how the conversation was going to take place, what their rights were. We funded an independent tenant advocate with the Redfern Legal Service, right? Like no one, you show me another government agency brave enough to do that, I'd be stoked to hear from them. Yeah. But we funded an independent tenant advocate and are funding one at Redfern to provide independent advice because we want to be held accountable. Yeah, I love that. We're prepared to be, But because people felt so informed about a process, right, about how the conversation was going to take place, what their rights were, who they could speak to, what the process was, that by the time we got to the actual relocation process, and we've got a wonderful team who really, their heart are in it, and they lead with empathy, and they're a wonderful team, the team that managed that process. But what we found, because they felt so informed, we weren't getting the enormous pushback. We weren't getting the kind of, the huge, protesting. And they were like, we've known this is coming. Absolutely. We understand it. We understand why you're doing it. And even for those who didn't agree with it, they clearly knew our position, right? Because we'd invested the time up front to make sure they were informed. And that's the way you have those kind of things take place in terms of asking someone to pick up their home and their memories and move to somewhere that's more appropriate to enable us to build more homes for more people who need it. And that's essentially why we do renewals, is to have more appropriate properties for the needs that we have today. But essentially, is to build more homes because people need them. Yeah. So we're really proud of that particular work. We've got a long way to go, and we're going to fail along the way and make some mistakes. Always. That's okay. But we'll try not to make the same mistakes twice and be better every time.
It's a great real-time example around how to navigate that at scale, and I think some of those, like, you talk about some stuff that is just really, like, just critical principles, the principle of consistency in communication and presence. Like, anyone listening to this is involved in community engagement. Like, you don't have to have graduated with honours from university to get that, mate. Like, showing up consistently. And like you said, like, mate, you rock up to a barbecue, there's 2 people there. Next time might be 30 or whatever. But the magic is in the consistency and showing up and communication and people feeling like they have the opportunity to be heard or to have a voice or to understand what's happening. Or to just have some agency to be heard.
It's that's when people get angry, tried and tested way to trust is consistency.
Absolutely.
If you're going to be a grumpy old bugger, be that same grumpy old bugger every day. Yeah. At least I know what I'm going to get. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so from a government agency standpoint, in terms of our presence and people's connection with us, well, let's shift it. That the only conversation, we're not just talking to you when your rent's in arrears. Or when we're fixing one of your taps that you've been waiting for 3 months, whatever it might be. Now we're just there to hear from you and talk to you and connect with you. Look, it does help, no question. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It does help when you've got things like our maintenance, which is a huge issue for social housing with our ageing stock. But we've got money now, which helps, so we can actually fix some things. But I do think in terms of the breaking down the barriers between connection between us and our tenants is really based on about that embedded dialogue, that embedded connection that now we have beyond transaction, which for a long time that's really, there's been a strong basis on that and needs to be, like people people need to pay rent, people need to be accountable for the state of the way they've left a home, like any kind of rental property, you know what I mean? Like that's that is what it is, you know. And I think I think that's pretty fair and reasonable that people care for their homes and whatnot. But the same said, let's not make that the only reason we talk to each other.
Definitely.
Let's talk to each other about how we can all contribute to a better community. And I think that's really the shifting sand and what I guess our leadership at Homes has enabled us to do.
Beautiful. Look, coming towards the end of our yarn, I think there's a stack of value in this for for the broader sector, for anyone working in the public sector, but anyone connected to this space that's forward facing as well, and also from a leadership perspective. But if you could wave a wand and change one thing in terms of housing and community services and what that looks like in terms of how things are being delivered, thinking forward, what's one thing you might sort of think about shifting and changing or hoping to see in the future?
It's a really great question. I've got to be like, I'm really, really fortunate. I'm going to suck up to my boss for a second, but in our leadership in Beck Pinkstone, she really drives us forward to innovate and to challenge. Don't just do something because it's always been the way you do it. And I feel really fortunate because in some ways I feel like through the work that I do, both her and others in our leadership have kind of, in my space, have given me a want to test some things and try some things around capturing lived experience and informing that. And I guess, the things I really, really am passionate about is around that people feel a part of what we're doing. And and we're making a significant investment in that now. And I know I'm not probably answering your question, but I actually feel really grateful for the spot we're in. We, in the tenant participation space, where we used to outsource it to Mission Australia. It was a contract for X amount of dollars. Like we've quadrupled that budget. Such is our commitment to this work. Like that's not something that 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Absolutely.
I think would have been on the table. I'm not convinced. I mean, I wasn't around, but I'm not convinced that it would have been on the table. And for us to be able to do that now, and I'm always happy to have more people to do that work. Of course, that's the one. But I think as a whole, I would love to see that across government in all the different things that we do. We're in a small but very important part of government. But us changing the way that we engage with communities, and I'm a passionate ally around Aboriginal outcomes, and we need to be better around that. If there was a one for me to do, it would be around capability building, more co-design, more ability for self-determination around the projects that we do. But I think there's a responsibility for us to capability and capacity build, and that's everything from having a really strong strategy around development for people, developing the next group of leaders. And I know there's various government programs that enable that, but I would love to see that. If I had a wand, I'd love to see. I'll bring it back to one of my biggest learnings in this community engagement space is an Aboriginal engagement principle of yarn at the front, business at the back. I just see so much value. So many of my mentors in the space are Aboriginal people, but I'm in the senior leadership position. But I'm tapping into community to get some, to learn and gather that. Well, how can we turn that into more senior leadership in the public sector? I think it needs to be a long-term plan around that. So I think the success of what we've been able to do so far, and we've got a long way to go, we've still got plenty of work to do. The fact that it's based on a Aboriginal community engagement principle of yarn at the front, business at the back, I think there's a real great opportunity for us to capture that more at scale. And I think that means a real investment over time around more lived experience in our workplace,
Absolutely.
And that, whether that be Aboriginal community members in our organisation, or whether it's people just grown up in social housing or have a clear connection with it. Beck tells a story about, her grandmother, lived in social housing, it was the core of their family growing and becoming, it's a part of her fabric is that her grandmother was in social housing. We need more lived experience, and if I had a wand, it would be pushing and programs where we could inject more people with lived experience into our sector.
Yeah, unreal. Well, I think we're on the way, and I think leaders like yourself carving out that path is only going to help us get further and further to it. So hopefully this is, we had a yarn, I know, trying to get some other sort of senior leaders and people doing great stuff in the social housing space on maybe a couple of other episodes, and we can have a few, episodes here that tackle this sort of stuff specifically that can really add value to the sector more broadly. I think would be really valuable. So you've helped me really start to contextualise that a little bit more, and we'll reach out to Beck Pinkstone as well. Hopefully you can connect us up, we can have a yarn. Famy's been someone we've been trying to get on for a while. We'll pin her down, and we'll keep building on this conversation because it's critical. We're pivotal time in the state, and people like yourselves really driving change, brah. And thanks for the leadership that you bring to it, the authenticity that you bring to it, and it's not easy work as well. So thanks for showing up and doing what you're doing, and hopefully we get you back on again, brah. And
first free time.
Yeah, that's it. Free-peat.
Third time offender. Repeat offender.
But thank you so much.
Appreciate
it.